Welcome to Off Script, NPR's series of conversations with Democratic primary candidates and voters from around the country. We are here in Newark, New Jersey, with Senator Cory Booker, who was mayor of this city for 8 years. You've been a senator since 2013. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
It's really good to be here. Thank you for being in my neighborhood.
And I also want to introduce the two Democratic undecided voters who are joining us today. Chanel Duns runs her own education and leadership consulting business right here in Newark. She is 48, an Army veteran, a single mother of 5, and a grandmother of 3. Chanel, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And also Diana Condelejo, 29 years old, an economist who works for a local healthcare network. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we are having each of these conversations in a restaurant of the candidates choosing. Senator Booker,
yes,
you chose Vonda's Kitchen here in Newark. What do you like to order when you come here?
Well, we chose this because when I was mayor of the city, we were trying to get more local people to be entrepreneurs, and especially women, and this was really one of our great success stories. And so Vonda is an incredible African-American woman entrepreneur. This is a usually packed restaurant. You guys have cleared it out a little bit.
We tend to have that effect on people.
And Vonda is a friend, so when I come in here, this is not a restaurant known for its vegan delicacies,
right.
But as a vegan, this is a soul food restaurant that when I come in here, she does something special for me.
Yeah, they're known for their catfish. They are known for their chicken. What do you order?
She does Brussels sprouts in a way that is a transformative human experience. When you put them
Wow.
in,
That's serious.
yes, these are very, very. She does wonderful things to vegetables.
I'm curious, as you're in the primary and you're going to states where there is, pork chop on a stick and fried butter, do voters you're trying to connect with ever give you kind of like the side eye about the fact that
there's the vegan tribe is growing around America, and even people that aren't. People seem to want to bring me vegan food everywhere I go. So I have been not want for incredible food all around the country.
Being well fed all over the country.
Yes, even at the Iowa State Fair, I had a deep fried peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which was amazing.
What?
Yes.
All right, well, before we get into the heavy stuff, I suppose a deep fried peanut butter and jelly sandwich is by definition heavy.
Yeah, very
but
heavy.
Do each of you have an icebreaker question you'd like to ask the senator? Chanel?
So I do.
Okay.
And this is maybe make it or break it for me.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's really heavy. So, Senator Booker, Tupac or Biggie?
Wow. That is deep pulling me down into controversy. I really like Tupac's music is something that like he's a number of songs that still source me, some deeply faithful songs, but I just always love Biggie. He's just a person that I just feel this affinity for because he was unapologetically who he was. So if you had to force me to choose,
I'm forcing.
then I'm going to say Biggie. But I probably listen to Tupac's music more.
You said that was a make or break question for you, so did he make it or
I'm a
break it?
Tupac fan all the way.
I could tell she was. I knew she
I'm
was.
all the way
Because
Tupac.
most people will go Tupac over Biggie.
There's still hope, though.
Yes, there's still hope. Thank God.
Diana, have you got an icebreaker question you'd like to
I
ask?
do. So, Senator Booker, you're a pretty handsome man, and I don't think it's going to get better than Rosario Dawson. So when are you proposing?
Wow.
Adios mio. I can't announce something like that. So she would be mad at me. That would be her saying no. Oh, you come up with a proposal to me on NPR for crying out loud?
It'd be pretty monumental, though, national television.
I will. If should I ever get to that point, I will try to embarrass her and put her on the spot. But I'm not making any. I'm very happy where I am right now. You've got me stammering for crying out loud. I just went to 2 of her premieres. One for an incredible show about The Need to Grow, it's called. It's a documentary about soil, which is something that I've put out policies about the farming practices in our country and what it's doing to the earth and the environment, and incentivizing farmers. And then I went to the next show, which I do not know what the implications are in public policy, but Zombieland 2.
Oh, yeah.
Which was an amazing night. I got to be her arm candy on the
Good
red
for
carpet.
you.
Yes.
She deserves it.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's get into some of the subjects that the two of you, Chanel and Diana, are most passionate about. And I know one thing that you both care deeply about is education, accessibility, the cost of education. Diana, can you tell us a little bit about your experience, and do you have a question for Senator Booker on that?
Sure. So what I really want to talk today about is the student debt crisis. I'm an immigrant. I'm a Latina. I, follow the American dream to pursue a college education. And unfortunately, it is also a pathway not only to economic stability, but a pathway to debt. And unfortunately, like many of my peers, we have to delay wealth building, like buying a house. And so my question for you is really, how do you intend to address the student debt crisis, not only for me, but for future generations?
So this is a culture-changing impact that we now have a nation that sees hundreds of billions dollars worth of debts for a generation who are delaying life choices, everything from marriage to buying homes because of crushing student debt. And to me, it's outrageous and unacceptable, especially when you look at our peer nations. Other developed countries are doing everything they can to lower the cost of college. From Germany, which is 0 to 4% of median income to go to college. Canada, I think, is like 7% of median income. In America, it's between 50 and 60%. And you have people graduating with tens of thousands, sometimes well over $100,000 worth of debt.
I'm there.
Yeah, I always say I own a house, New Jersey prices, that I never walked into.
Right.
Yes.
Just the cost of your debt is
Just
the
the
cost of
cost
a
of
house.
That's how bad it is.
So we need to start right away by something that this is a little bit out of the box, but we think that every child in America should have a child savings account created for them. And my plan is called baby bonds. And what you do is, for the lowest income kids, they could build upwards of $50,000 by an interest-bearing account. It's an amazing program that a lot of folks have looked at that can really shift the wealth dynamic. But one of the things people can do with that money is to help to afford college. But the next thing we have to do is bring down the cost of college. And this is why, as a senator, I'm a champion of some legislation for debt-free college in America.
Yes.
And that's something that we're gonna get done. But that doesn't help folks with debt right now.
Right.
And so that's what we have to have a plan for, is how to alleviate or mitigate what I think is a cultural warping reality in America. And so we're going to do a number of things. Number one, I believe in debt forgiveness for people who are in public service professions. So whether you're a public school teacher or another, you take your law degree and want to be a public defender, we should have an aggressive loan forgiveness for those folks. I think another thing we should do is through interest rates, which right now you can't change your interest rate. You can refinance a car loan or a mortgage, but you can't refinance. I don't know if you want to share with us, what's your interest rates now on your loan?
It's about 6.7%.
Which is kind of outrageous at a time that we see interest rates have fallen so low. And so I believe that you should be able to refinance that, and that the people who are making profits off of your federal loan right now, i.e. the federal government, actually makes billions of dollars of profits off the back of millennials and folks who are working like you. I will change that. Number one, letting you refinance, but also taking those profits that we've been making and start to reinvest them in programs to help lessen your overall payments. And so for me, there's a lot of things we just have to change around student loans, including, you can discharge debts in bankruptcy, but your student loans you just can't. And that to me is unacceptable as well. So we're going to go ahead.
If I could
please.
just jump in, I'm sorry. So I'm familiar with the baby bonds, right? But I have twins that are in college right now. Well, one who's actually taking a semester off because of the student loan debt. He just can't afford to be there. So how do you keep kids that from day one, we said college is the pathway to success. You have to go to college. How do you keep them encouraged when they hit this wall and can't attend college because they can't afford it?
Well, a couple things. One is, if I become president, we're going to pass that debt-free college bill, which is going to help lower his costs and re-encourage them to go in. But in addition to that, look, we have to begin to make sure that every child doesn't feel like they're hitting a wall, but has pathways for success. Now, we all live in Newark, and one thing I know from pulling together my manufacturers here in the city when I was mayor, I remember asking them, so what are your pain points? I wanted to know what their pain points were, because I wanted to grow manufacturing jobs in Newark. And I expect their first complaint to me to be, oh, property taxes here are too high.
Yeah.
Their biggest complaints, and taxes were lower on the poll than I thought, but their first complaint was, we cannot find employees. So one manufacturer here in Newark was like, we can't find machinists. And I said, well, what's your starting machinist salary? And they were like, something like $70,000.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll stop being a mayor and become a machinist. And I say that to say that, we are still looking at our country as college is like the epic goal. Well, other economies, I mentioned Germany earlier, are saying, well, wait a minute, we're going to start to make sure we honor all pathways, because in a 21st century economy, we don't necessarily need more people with political science degrees and sociology degrees like I have. We may need people with advanced manufacturing skills. And that's why I think we also have to start getting bolder pathways towards apprenticeship programs like our competitors are doing that are plugging into it. So,
but he's put in 3 years of college. This would have been his senior year. And so how do you're $100,000 almost in debt. How do you throw all of that away and say, okay, well, now I'm going to pick up this trade?
And forgive me, because number one, we want to make sure that every kid has a pathway, but for your child that's got $100,000 in already in debt.
Well, his mama does.
His mom does. I mean, that's just obscene to me.
It's ridiculous.
It's obscene.
And it's two of them at the same time.
Right.
So it's,
No,
that much
obscene.
harder.
And that's why, number one, we have to have a way of lowering the cost of college. And then specifically for your child, I'm wondering what schools, because there's a lot of schools, I believe in the schools that are running schemes and scams on students, that's number one. We should, just like we had bailout for industries and Wall Street, we should be, kids who find themselves with despicable practices of schools, we should be forgiving that debt completely, because I have a problem right now. I have a problem right now with colleges in general, frankly, who take all of this federal money. And I can increase Pell Grants as President of the United States 50%, but if colleges are raising their tuition 60% with no accountability whatsoever, a lot of colleges are raising, what is that going to? Is it going to your athletic program? Is it going to other kind of waste? So one thing I believe in is increasing the resources to students like yours in scholarships and loan forgiveness. But I also believe in holding people who take federal dollars accountable for their spending practices.
Diana, you're an economist. When you hear this talk of baby bonds and the different financial machinations that could make college accessible, does it seem plausible to you?
Yeah, so I have concerns on feasibility. I hear you on the debt forgiveness, and that sounds great, but how would you fund that? Sustainability-wise, how are you looking, to fund that?
Right, and it's one of the reasons why differentiating myself from other candidates who might want to say free college, universal debt forgiveness, that does have a big price tag. But my program, we've already shown that we can pay for, number one, by reversing a lot of these costly Trump tax cuts, which have blown, as you know, about $1 trillion hole in our deficit, which would give us a lot of those resources. And so we're going to do debt-free college by, number one, the federal government making a contribution, but demanding that states match us as well and to begin to hit those tuition targets. So this is something actually that is feasible. We've run the numbers on it. The legislation I'm talking about is actually already exists in Congress, and the Congressional Budget Office has run those numbers. So it's something that we can afford, and I believe it's something that actually we can't afford not to do, because by people like yourself having such inhibiting debt, you're failing to do a lot of other things that would grow the economy. Like the housing market is suffering right now because, as you said before. So my program would not only be affordable by our pay-fors, as they call them, but it also will be something by liberating you from that debt. It's going to stimulate the economy and overall growth as well.
Is that persuasive to you, Diana?
Somewhat, but I also actually, as you were, speaking, I realized that you did mention, an example about there being not enough machinists in the economy, or creating apprenticeship models, and I understand that, but also we're playing to that narrative that we're blaming the talent in our communities isn't there. And so I'm actually a Newark 2020 hire. I came back
Explain for people who aren't familiar what the Newark 2020 program is.
The Newark 2020 is an initiative by Mayor Rajay Baraka, who really tried to address the unemployment issue in Newark by encouraging anchor and corporate institutions in the city to hire 2020 Newark residents by the year 2020. And so, I come back with this great graduate degree from the Lund School of Economics, and I don't want to contribute to the brain drain. I'm trying to come back to my hometown, give back. And to be honest, I applied everywhere, and I'm not going to call any corporate institutions. But I also did a social experiment where I changed my name, and I changed my address.
You mean you changed your name to sound less Latina?
Yes, correct. Candelejo wasn't doing it for me. And I started getting callbacks. And so
wow, when you changed your name on your resume, more people called you back.
And my address, exactly. And so I also find it interesting that we have to do more to keep employers accountable, to also be ready to hire and willing to hire the talent that is actually educated, qualified, and could meet their demand. And so how do you intend to also hold the employers accountable, to hire the community?
No, I love that. And there are a lot of problems with employers, and I've seen studies where they swap out pictures on resumes, and you see it dramatically change. And this is why we need to have open conversations about discrimination in our country and how it still is rife within our society, from our policing practices to the hiring practices that you did. And this is, again, why we should be doing things like my senior senator before I got into the United States Senator, Bob Menendez, we're the only state that has actually 2 minorities representing them in Washington, began to demand that corporate boards report their diversity statistics. I found in the United States Senate, when I got there, I was shocked at how little diversity there was. And so I went.
Do you mean among staff? Because we all know among senators there isn't a lot.
No, there's not a lot among senators, but you would imagine that, especially amongst the Democratic Party, we're being elected by very diverse coalitions. But I was pretty surprised when I got there. I remember looking at the Judiciary Committee in my cursory review. I couldn't find one African American on the Judiciary Committee, yet they're making policies that are disproportionately affecting African Americans.
We're going to talk about that too.
Yes. So Senator Brian Schatz and I went to Senator Schumer, and he cooperated in saying, okay, I just know this from being the mayor of the city, that if you want to, if something's important to you, you've got to demand measurements and accountability. So we asked all the United States senators in the Democratic Party to release their diversity statistics, gender and race diversity. And number one, they were not what they should be. But guess what's now starting to happen? You're seeing a lot more people of color and women being hired in positions.
Okay, but Congress is a very small, rarefied bubble, and we're talking about corporations in
exactly.
Newark.
And so I'm talking about my priorities when, as President of the United States, is to make sure that we start doing something about the diversity problems that we have. And that means holding people accountability for discrimination. And so when we have a president right now who, through his Department of Justice and the other levers of accountability that we have to fight against discrimination, is not bringing those suits, that's very problematic. And so for me, I want to be very clear. One is we've got to make sure that people who are talented, no matter what their background, and by the way, we don't talk about enough about discrimination against people with disabilities. We don't talk about enough about discrimination against LGBTQ Americans.
Which the Supreme Court is considering right now.
To literally the majority of states in America, you can be denied a job or fired from a job just because you're gay with no legal recourse whatsoever. And so these are issues that I take very seriously. And the reason why I brought up the Senate was because no matter what job I have, I'm one of these people that calls this out. I do want to say, though, about this idea of it's not and my mom did HR for IBM and used to say the same thing. People that said, oh, I can't find qualified women aren't looking then enough and don't have systems of doing it. But I want to differentiate that from what I was saying before, which is we know that there are millions of jobs in this country where we are not training people in this country for the jobs that are actually there, advanced manufacturing, in the medical profession. And we need to do what other countries are doing, which is attenuating their educational systems for the jobs of the 21st century.
So I agree with that. And I understand what Diana is saying too. Like, I don't think the question was about people not being trained and qualified.
Yes.
But that's my question. What about the folks that aren't trained and qualified? I know here in Newark there's been a lot of talk about universal basic income. And what are your thoughts with universal basic income? And how does that work in synergy with your baby bonds? Where would that money come from?
Right. And so, again, the baby bonds program, because I'm saying this for my economist's benefit, everything that we do, we talk about how we would pay for it. So our baby bonds proposal, we can pay for that by shifting back to the crazy old days of 2009 and going back to what the estate tax was then, and eliminating some of the estate tax loopholes pays for our baby bond proposal. And I like baby bonds so much better than universal basic income is because I just don't believe in giving money to people who already have a lot of money.
The UK did try a baby bonds program, and after the Great Recession, they folded the program. It wasn't successful. It didn't withstand a downturn of that scale.
No, they folded the program because the political will wasn't there to sustain it. It wasn't that it wasn't working. And that was the problem, is they didn't play the baby bonds out, and their system, folks turned against it. So
political will to go into debt, political will to do what?
Political will to sustain the payments, to say that this is a priority for our society. And so what I'm saying is that we know, and by the way, this is an idea that doesn't come from the left, it comes from the left and the right. Think tanks both are saying, we are a society that right now uses its tax code to reward people with wealth by giving them tax breaks to create more wealth. Now, some of these things I agree with. The mortgage income deduction is overwhelmingly used by people with making six figures and above. But the reality is why don't we have something that's helping people create wealth who don't have wealth? Why aren't we using our tax code not just to make the rich richer, but also to do that? And so the reason why I like my program better than universal basic income, number one, it's not giving money to people with wealth. It says that everybody in this country gets $1,000 in an account. And that account will build with upwards of $2,000 being placed into it based upon the wealth of your family. And the powerful thing about this is it closes the racial wealth gap. As Columbia University says, it virtually eliminates that for kids. And it would give children the ability to have something that can create generational wealth. Paychecks help you get by. Wealth helps you get ahead. And now you can invest that not only in college, but if you want to do it in that training program or in buying a home, the kind of things that will help not just that child, now 18, but would help the economy as a whole.
We've been talking a lot about the cost of higher education, but there are at least 12 years leading up to that. And
right.
Chanel, you've raised 5 children in Newark. You're helping to raise 3 grandchildren.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about accessibility to public education and to a good education at the younger ages?
Right. So my kids have run the gamut of it. Homeschool, private school, charter school, public school, you name it. Right now, I'm actually considering world schooling my grandchildren just for the experience of seeing other cultures and, learning different languages.
That's a new phrase for me, world schooling, which means going to taking them to other countries to learn.
Yes, and essentially homeschooling in different parts of the country.
Different parts of the world.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Does that reflect a lack of confidence that they could get a great education here in Newark?
That reflects the lack of confidence that what I want to instill in them, what I feel like their platform should be, what I feel like their foundation should be. I don't know what in Newark is comparable to that. So right now, my grandchildren, all of my children are adults. My grandchildren have been to two different charter schools in the city of Newark, all of which I don't feel is, where they are now is really a great school.
Which one?
So I don't want to say.
Okay. I know my schools in Newark very well.
Right.
You do, and you know one of them.
Putting them on blast before a national audience.
But while I think we are getting there in Newark, we're not there yet. And I'm not willing to allow yet another generation to be the crash test dummies to get there. So what is it that can happen immediately? I mean, I hear all the time a lot of talk about education, what we're going to do when I'm in office, what we can do 2045 and 2062. And I need to know what can be done immediately to ensure that not only are they getting a quality education, but it's equitable across the board.
So let me just say, of all the people running in this presidential primary, very few of the people on that stage have been into the weeds on education as much as I have, and have taken a system that was under state takeover, that was one of the worst performing urban districts in the state of New Jersey, to now the #1 school system in the whole country for beat the odds schools, kids in poverty going on to high performance.
I do want to jump in and explain what beat the odds schools means, because it's a phrase you've used. It comes from a study by the Center for Reinventing Public Education. This included public, private, and charter schools.
Yes.
And while this study using 7-year-old data did show that students from underprivileged backgrounds were performing at a high level, there were a lot of other findings in this study that were really not very positive for Newark. To give you just one example, the study said, though blacks represent just over half of Newark's student population, only about 6% of the city's black students attend a top-scoring school in math, compared to 85% of white students.
And so I love that you pointed out that was a 7-year-old study, because now, since those 7 years, if you're an African-American student in the city of Newark, your chances of going to a school that beats the suburban schools went up almost 400%. So what you've seen now, as blacks are the majority of our kids, is their options, because now we've created an equitable one enrollment system. Their options have gone skyrocketed in terms of the quality of their schools they can go to. So not only have we seen, since that study, over 30% increase in overall over the last decade in graduation scores, but you've seen math and reading scores go up to a level that is really astonishing in terms of the gains our kids have made.
And yet Chanel doesn't have confidence that her...
But my point is, and I know that I actually know this, Chanel and I have bumped into each other at school events, so I know at least one of the great charter schools that some of your family is, which we will not mention out of respect.
And that's the one I wasn't satisfied with.
Right. And by the way, my mom and I went to one of the to a suburban school. My mom was a lot like you in the sense of a great driving mother who even then was not satisfied and was one of those moms that would come into a school and really demand better in terms of the experience we get. And by the way, that is wonderful and that is extraordinary. I just want to give this as background to say that the kind of measurable progress that Newark has had that is unassailable in terms of the improvements from where we've been. Do we still need to improve? Heck yeah.
Of course.
But the reality is for a city where a significant amount of our population is at or below the poverty line, we now are distinguishing ourselves nationally by the kids that are getting a chance to go to high-performing schools, many of which. But that's not what I'm going to do as president. Let me just tell you. Let me go through what I want to do as president of the United States to help our school systems. So first and foremost, the biggest bet we made here in Newark was to increase teachers' salary. And right now we have a profession that does not reward or compensate teachers in the profession in the ways that it should. We have got to get back to elevating the importance of this profession and backing teachers up with salaries, with loan forgiveness, with getting their training paid for, and the kind of obstacles that will help us to get to up the profession even more. Number two, one of the biggest challenges in Newark, as in rural schools and others, is the cost of special education, which is a massive cost to make sure that every child, every beautiful child, has quality education. Well, the federal government has never met its obligation there. As President of the United States, I will make sure it meets its obligation. For a big urban district like Newark, it means tens and tens of millions of dollars of more resources that they can be investing, not just in special education, but freeing up other dollars to make the whole school experience even richer and better.
So I on Mondays, with a co-host, I do a podcast called Parenting Evolution. So we talk to parents about a myriad of different things, and the subject of education always comes up. And so I hear the numbers, I hear the statistics, but parents don't want to hear that, right? Their takeaway is how schools make them feel and how their children feel when they come from these institutions. And the biggest issue, again, is, especially for urban communities, children going to schools and not seeing people in those buildings that look like them, that reflect them, or that are teaching them or helping to teach who they are and where they come from.
Diana, you're nodding your head.
I absolutely agree that the teachers should definitely reflect the community. They also come with a different eye and perspective of even how to address students, understanding their lived experience. And so I think it's keenly important that it reflects the local hiring population.
No, I absolutely agree with that. In fact, the data shows if a black male is in a classroom, the achievement of the black boys in that school goes significantly up. So I definitely agree with that. And look, we have to make sure that we are doing a lot more around particular problems of urban education. This is why the progress that had begun, that's been now turned around on breaking the school-to-prison pipeline. There's so much more that we could be doing in our schools from the national level to address this issue.
Can we talk about that?
I think this is a good moment to pivot to another issue that has been important in your career and is important to both Diana and Chanel.
May I make one really important issue before we pivot? Because you know this to be true, that the problem also is that we are a nation, and I saw this in Newark, that we don't understand that 90% of brain development happens between the womb and the 5th year. And so our teachers often are getting children, and this is what I hear from kindergarten and first grade teachers all around the country, but definitely here in Newark, is by the time they get to school, they're very far behind. And so we are a nation that if you look at what our competitors are doing on education, understanding the most valuable natural resource in a country now, in a global, in any country now, in a global knowledge-based society, is the genius of our children. And if brain development is happening that much, why is the United States so far behind on prenatal care? We lead on infant mortality, maternal mortality. We lead on low birth weight babies and all the complications with that. And again, as a guy who actually did run stuff, I can tell you it's cheaper to give every woman, every low-income woman access to doula care, than it is to pay for the complications at birth. Then we fall down by not having affordable child care in this country, not having paid family leave, not having universal preschool. We are an outlier of all of the developed nations that do more than we do to cultivate that genius before they even get to K-12 years. One of the best ways that I can help as a President of the United States to empower our kids to succeed is doing much more for them in that womb until 5th year, and we are.
So would that be better healthcare practices, because as an entrepreneur, I take full advantage of my Obamacare. Right. But even with that, there's still a large number of people that don't qualify for ACA or still can't find quality care with the ACA. I have a son who suffers from juvenile diabetes. He was diagnosed at the age of 5. He's 28 now. And I have a 27-year-old daughter with her master's degree who's not working right now and has no health care because she can't be on mine or my father.
And Diana, when you came back to the United States after your master's degree and you were looking for a job, what was your health care situation?
Right.
I also had really poor, satisfactory health care.
Which is crazy. I studied in England as well. To go from a system where they have
NHS,
NHS universal health care to go from a system that has these massive gulfs in which people fall in. So these are issues, as the only person in the United States Senate that lives in a low-income Black and brown community, these were issues that have been driving me. So even before I was running for president of the United States, I put in something called the Mommies Act, which was focusing on the healthcare needs of women having children. And so there's a number of things that we have to do, from expanding Medicaid offerings, because right now we are pushing women out of hospitals who still have healthcare needs. It's one of the reasons why we have a maternal mortality rate that's so high amongst women in America compared to other nations. And for African American women, it's almost 4 times higher. But it also includes making access to things that make sense. I mentioned doula care before. We need to make sure that women have the kind of support and resources they need to have healthy children. And so for me, this is penny wise and pound foolish in our country, that we would so shortchange. And another thing, and I know you've experienced this, is just the cost of childcare is outrageous in this country, where you have in the majority of states in America, the cost of childcare is actually more expensive than the cost of tuition in the state colleges. That is just stunning. And again, I have a vision and a plan for doing that. Legislation already been presented. These are things that are policy decisions that we're making that are hurting children, straining families, costing us more on the back end because of the problems, as opposed to being a country that says we're going to invest in our children on the front end. And I'm sorry that just loading on policy, because we're having a policy discussion with Undecided Voters, it's really important that we all know this, that the costs attenuated with having children put people in situations where in a so-called good economy where they're falling behind. And it's not just childcare costs. I believe that right now, from housing costs, which are getting higher and higher and higher, I know where you told me before where you live, all the way to just the costs of normal goods. I see people in our community right now who work full-time jobs, catch extra shifts to provide for their families, but they still need food stamps.
These things are so clearly interconnected, from healthcare to the cost of childcare to education to the cost
solutions are very
to
common
wages.
sense.
But I want to make sure we have time to get to one other major issue that is connected to all of this, which I know has been important to your career and is important to both you, Chanel, and you, Diana, which is the criminal justice system.
Yes.
Police and prisons. Diana, do you have a question for the senator about this?
Yeah, so we see that body cameras, are making police brutality more salient, unfortunately, affecting disproportionately more the Black and Latino communities. I just want to better understand, what are your policies in order to improve our system, our police system here in the United States?
So, look, this is something I've learned the hard way running a police department here, that police accountability is so critically important in police transparency. And so before I became a senator, worked with the ACLU here to try to create national models for police transparency. And one of the biggest things we learned, and I learned this from working with the DOJ here in Newark, is that you have even good intentioned people who just, because we're not doing deep dives on the data, you don't have that kind of objective understanding like you found out with your resume, but objective understanding of what's happening with police departments. So the first thing that I'm going to do as President of the United States is reinitiate what Obama had as Task Force on 21st Century Policing. It's a bill that I put in that calls for deep data collection from our nation's police departments.
If I may, you refer to working with the DOJ, the Justice Department in Newark, but the police force in Newark came under a consent decree from the Department of Justice because the abuses while you were mayor were so egregious, and that went on for years. This was
Well, just to give you a little bit of a counter to that is I inherited a police department with decades-long problems and patterns and practices. And we were fighting to correct those things, not moving as quickly as we should have. And the DOJ came in, which at first I was like, why do I need the DOJ? But when they presented us with the data, we saw that we were not moving fast enough to correct the problems.
You were mayor for 8 years, and those problems persisted well into your second term. How much time do you think was reasonable?
Well, we actually were making tremendous strides on that. And again, having worked with the DOJ, a lot of the things we were doing, they just doubled down by helping us with resources to address those problems. And as the head of the ACLU themselves will tell you, that we were embracing reforms, not just in word, but in leadership and presenting national standard best practices by the time I was in.
So
Chanel.
While I feel like the consent decree is a piece of the puzzle, I mean, we still have to have people in place that actually want to adhere to that consent decree, right? And so I want to kind of take it back to, yeah, we need to do the data. Yeah, we have to have the numbers. We have to do all this research. But if people are literally dying, at the hands of the police or whatever you may have here in the street, and how do you then talk to that parent?
Have you had firsthand experience involving police?
Sure, I have. I can give you my own experience with my very own son. Thank God that he was able to walk away, but he was definitely in a position where he was in a car. He was stopped for absolutely no reason. He was 17 at the time. Dragged him out of the car, handcuffed him, put him in the back of the police car, still not telling him what's going on. And just by happen, he had his St. Benedict's prep ID in his pocket. And when the officer saw that he went to this private school here in Newark, he changed his actions towards him and literally left my son standing on the street, took his cousin that he was with into the precinct for nothing because he was eventually let go as well, but left my minor child on the street at like midnight just by itself.
Yeah, and as a black man who grew up in this country too and has stories exactly very similar to that, I should say, who's been followed in department stores, just walking around, the indignities that as a young black person that you faced in my generation as well as the kids today is absolutely outrageous and unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so it's not just data collection. I had just begun in talking about my the things that we need to do to take steps on that. And that's why when Black Lives Matter folks sat down with big city police chiefs and others to develop a pathway to 21st century policing, these are the kind of things that are so urgent that I will follow through on, that means a lot more than just data collection. Again, this is having a president of the United States who's experienced these things and feels driven to deal with them, has experience running a police department where we did do a lot of very good things that we saw started to work and heal in our communities. We have to deal with an issue that is a life or death issue in this country, because we are seeing so many unarmed African Americans. And as a guy that you gave the same talk to your kids that my parents gave me, because of the real danger that exists in this country. And so it's more than just data collection. It's more than just body cameras. This has to do with recognizing that implicit racial bias is a reality in this country. And unless you start doing everything from training police officers, getting a diverse police force, one of the things that we worked on in a big way in the city of Newark is to make sure that our police force lived in our community and reflected our community and from our community. It means making sure that we have a DOJ under my leadership that will actually investigate these things, hold people accountable, take up cases when local prosecutors are unwilling to prosecute clear violations of people's civil rights. There has to be a larger vision for how that we do this. And
but what do you say to, so in a lot of my work, I talk to like first-time voters, kids that are just turning 18, and those are the things that come up for them, like the criminal justice reform systems. And when we talk about the presidential candidacy, a lot of times they say they don't feel like you are the voice, the black voice for the black youth. How do you respond to not being able to connect to that demographic of youth?
Well, number one, I think we actually do connect to it. Mm-hmm. Some of our biggest supports from HBCUs to African-American young people who are big activists for our campaign. It's one of the groups we do very well in. But more than that, look, this is the issue, as you know, as a United States Senator. In fact, when I was running for the United States Senate, my pollster said, this isn't an issue that polls in the top 5 or so of things. Why are you talking about it at every stop? And I go, I'm talking about it because this is a national crisis, that we're a country that swears an oath. We all put our hand on our heart and say that we'll be a nation of liberty and justice for all. But that's not true.
Right.
And it's aspirational. And we live in a country that, as Brian Stevenson says, it treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent.
Right.
We live in a country where marijuana, everybody thinks that somehow we're making some advancements. There were more marijuana arrests in 2017 than all violent crime arrests combined. And people in college campuses aren't getting arrested for marijuana. It's people in communities like ours.
Right.
You're 4 times more likely, even though there's no difference in usage or selling, you're 4 times more likely to be arrested for it. And I know people all over this city, because I've knocked on just about every door in the community we're in, who have records for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing.
Right.
And what's horrible about that most Americans don't understand, is it's a life sentence. Because now you can't get a job, you can't get a business license, you can't get a loan from the bank. And so this is what gets me actually angry when people are talking about, we need to legalize marijuana, and they're not saying in the same breath that we need to expunge the records of people who've been convicted. So let my work speak for me. In the United States Senate, I've pushed more than a dozen bills on these issues. It spanned from police accountability all the way to the bill that I actually got passed, that I led with Dick Durbin from the Democratic side in the Senate for the First Step Act, which has already led to the liberation of thousands of people, overwhelmingly Black and Latino people.
Working closely with Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law.
Working closely with, first of all, for years before Jared Kushner even got to office, we were working with Republicans of all backgrounds to get this bill done. So I'm not only the person in this race that has the best record on criminal justice reform at the federal level, I produce results. I've even written bills that we couldn't get passed on the Senate level, but people took literally my Dignity Act for women incarcerated and now have passed the Dignity Acts in at least 10 states around this country.
Let's talk about another important aspect of the criminal justice system, which is that, Diana, I know you have questions about the prison system and the way that it functions in America today.
Yeah, so there are jails that are privatized, and so the idea that they're making a profit while keeping people in it, maintaining folks in there, again, disproportionately, we know what those statistics looks like, the minority groups. Do you have any thoughts on deprivatization or reforming the entire jail system itself?
Oh, absolutely. Thoughts and legislation. This is really my wheelhouse. So I believe private prisons should be a thing of the past. They should be legalized. And by the way, the biggest ones are in our immigration systems, where they have little quotas for how many people. They lobby the federal government for things like quotas and other criminal justice measures that will ensure their profits continue. This is outrageous. It's tantamount to slavery, that people are making profits off of the incarceration of other people. It's something I just patently do not believe in. But overall, on criminal justice reform, when it comes to what happens to people in prisons, this has been something I've been fighting for since, again, I was a city councilman here in this city. And we've been able to make some changes. The last thing I got in that bill, in negotiating with the White House,
the First Step Act.
The First Step Act was a ban on juvenile solitary confinement in our prisons, because that is, again, other countries call that torture. It has permanent psychological harm.
Although, if I'm not
children.
mistaken, that only applies to the federal prison system, and there are still state prison systems in which that's legal.
100%. It was a federal bill. We were not able to get it banned in its entirety, but again, it's an important step in the right direction. And so for me, what happens in those prisons, we often, again, people think, in terms of a draconian view, I still remember when they got rid of Pell Grants to people in prison. People are like, why should my taxpayer dollars go? It's just such a short-sighted, punitive, draconian thing when the people don't realize that every dollar we spend on education of people when they're incarcerated, it saves about $4 in costs associated with recidivism, because people who's getting their BA in prison have very low recidivism rates.
Diana, you're shaking your head.
So I agree, yes, that the education element and component is very important, but also I'm curious to know more about the workforce development initiatives that we're doing, for incarcerated members, but also the reentry population.
Yeah, and so this is, you're hitting fingers on things that I've been speaking very strongly about for years, and from the Senate floor, that how we are just not understanding that reentry period is so critical, where a person now is out of prison. They can't get public housing. They can't find a job. They have to pay child support. They have to find something to eat. They have to get a roof over their head. And so what do? That's why we see recidivism rates so high. So we here, when I was mayor of the city of Newark, created New Jersey's first ever Office of Reentry. We not only did things on the front end to keep people from going to the courts, New Jersey's first veterans courts and youth courts, to try to stop us trying to solve every problem with incarceration, but we did big efforts to help people when they come home from a farm where we have an entire block right here in this neighborhood. We got people work and jobs. On the federal level, what I've done is say, number one, we're very close to getting passed a big bill that would ban the box, so to speak, which means that when people have to get that job application and they ask you, have you ever been arrested? If you check that box, you're just going to be, your resume is going to be thrown out. Nobody wants to know the circumstances of it or what have you. And so what we say for the biggest employer in the country is actually the federal government and federal contractors. My legislation says that checking of the box should be taken away from the front end and pushes it all the way back to when you get a conditional offer then. And data shows that it will dramatically increase the number of people that are hired. In addition to that, we need to make sure that we're doing things while people are incarcerated. We don't do a good enough job dealing with people's drug addictions.
Mental health illnesses.
God bless
you.
I mean,
if you talk to a lot of the homeless population here in Newark, you'll find those two things. You'll find mental health issues and people of color who have just been released from prison and can't get a job.
Absolutely.
Can't get housing. If you can't get a job, you can't get housing, you can't get health care. You can't take care of your mental health issues. So all of it kind of encompasses like the three things that we've been talking about: criminal justice reform, health care, and education. I don't think there's one fit for everything, but there has to be something that can be done in the immediate to kind of remedy some of those things that we see every single day.
And I so appreciate that you're saying this, because everything we're talking about, there is an intersectionality.
Yeah.
And this is why the profound racial biases that are in the criminal justice system are destroying communities around this country. Newark's, because of the over-incarceration in communities like ours, people don't put the dots together. When you take away a mom or a dad away from their children, the wage earner, and again, arresting them for nonviolent drug crimes that presidents have admitted to doing, that family falls into financial crisis. They get evicted. That child does worse in school. Healthcare, all these things are interconnected. Yep. And so what really frustrates me is we're doing things in a way that is so much more expensive. Because remember, everything from our immigration system, the way we're doing it now, Obama showed that there's cheaper ways to do it, that you can get 100% compliance without these detention facilities. All the way to that, to right across the street from where I live, around the corner, is a drug treatment center, you know it, called Integrity House. And I sometimes go over there and sit with the guys in the past. I'll bring food. They get mad. It's vegan food. And you know, when you talk to the guys, you see the absurdity of these beautiful human beings who tell their stories about addiction or mental health issues, and have been treated with dozens and dozens of arrests before they find their way to mental health care or addiction or care for their addiction.
You're talking about a wholesale transformation of the mental health, prison, police system. Is this something that a president can accomplish?
No, absolutely. First of all, when you say mental health, I want to cheer you, because we've so stigmatized it that it barely even gets talked about in our presidential race. But most of us have either experienced mental health issues or know somebody that has in our family. And that's why, just using the intersectionality with our schools, you know, having professionals in schools that can early detect bipolar disorder, depression. I mean, we know this from living in Newark. There are a lot of kids out there getting, quote unquote, in trouble because they have undiagnosed mental health care needs. And so, can a president chart a course for a country? Well, let me tell you, Ronald Reagan did the opposite by destroying our mental health care system the way it is right now and pushing it towards jails and prisons. Can a president stand up and make the economic sense that says what's more expensive? They've run the data on this. Seattle did it. What's more expensive, having a mentally ill homeless person, a mentally ill person homeless on the streets, or an affordable, or in a supportive housing is what they call it? Well, it is cheaper, because that mentally ill person on the streets ends up in our jails and our hospital emergency rooms. And so, this is something for me. the issues that don't make the debate stage, the issues that aren't the so-called sexy issues, but having run a city that we know, criminal justice reform, mental health care, child care, all of these things are critical for us becoming a more beloved community, a healthier society, more economically productive, and not losing our most valuable natural resources to death, jail, prison, or our hospitals.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground, and because our time is short, I just want to ask a couple questions about the news of the day. And of course, the most important story is impeachment.
Well, and by the way, I just want to say the shocking, jarring reality that you're saying the most important is the news of the day, and I agree that is the news of the day and what the news cycle's covering. But if we don't begin to start valuing the urgency of child poverty in this country, the urgency of a broken criminal, if this never becomes something that we want to talk about, so if I'm president of the United States,
and we have spent the better part of an hour talking about
I'm not
those
criticizing
things,
you,
so.
I'm just criticizing that in NPR has always been my bedrock as a person growing up, because you get much more substantively in the issues. I'm just venting to you as a presidential candidate who gets asked about the inane realities of a Donald Trump tweet more than I talk about the urgent needs of my children.
So indulge us for one moment.
Okay.
And as the House is carrying out its impeachment inquiry, you sit in the Republican-controlled Senate. What do you anticipate will happen if and when this reaches the Senate?
Again, we have a long way before we get there, and a very important investigation to go through, which it seems every day or every other day, there's new breaking news that is damning the conduct of this president. So I know we just had a recalled ambassador testified for over 8 hours yesterday. Critical information is going to come out.
This Marie Yovanovitch, the former ambassador to Ukraine.
But she is just one of, I would imagine, dozens of people who have relevant information about the misconduct of the president, potentially at least 2 cabinet members, others in the State Department, others in the Department of Justice. This is a president that seems to now routinely have been using his office and the leverage he's had with countries ranging from Ukraine to potentially now Australia and others, to leverage them to do the dirty work of his research on.
But so the question is, when the Republican-controlled Senate gets all of what you describe as this damning information, what do you expect them to do with it?
Again, when Nixon's impeachment proceedings began, the majority of Republicans were in lockstep with their partisan dictates. What happened there, and the reason why Nixon resigned, was because the more information came out, the more Republicans who were put party behind their patriotism started making the right decision. So we don't know what's going to happen in the journey from impeachment inquiry to articles of impeachment written up to it coming over for a trial. And my hope is that the full truth comes out. Now, we have a problem right now because we have a president who is stonewalling, who is not saying he's not subject to the checks and balances and the oversight as prescribed by the Constitution. That alone could be an impeachable offense. So much of this is going to play out in the courts as well, while we're going on parallel tracks of interviewing incredible patriotic people like the ambassador we just mentioned, who was given orders not to come but obeyed a congressional subpoena. This is all going to play out. I can't predict how it will end.
There are polls that show a majority of Americans would prefer that ultimately President Trump's fate be decided at the ballot box. That opportunity will be in just over a year from now. Why not let voters make the decision?
I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. I didn't swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution unless there's an election coming up. This is someone who is violating the Constitution, potentially. This is someone who is doing things that are unacceptable, that the long arc of history will look back and say, what did the United States Senate, what did the Congress do when a president of the United States was acting more like a dictator or a totalitarian, authoritarian leader than someone who's subject to the checks and balances as designed by our founders? So politics be damned. I have a job to do, which is to hold the executive accountable. And we should be doing that. This election is going to come. I don't know what the state of things is going to be, but when in this moment in history, the right thing to do is not just to sit back and say, okay, Mr. President, do whatever you want, because these are ongoing crises. The Russians are attacking Ukraine right now, not to mention attacking our country. And this is a president that is potentially ongoingly doing things that are in violation. So it is unacceptable to me to think that I'm just going to wait 13 months until there's an election and not do my job. No, I was elected by the people of the state of New Jersey to do a job. I'm going to get the job done.
Okay, so we have been talking about a lot of things today. And Diana and Chanel, you've both had opportunities to ask Senator Booker questions. You're both undecided Democratic voters. Is there anything you've heard in the last hour that changed your mind about something that you thought, I'm going to take that home and tell my family about it? Something that you're going to be talking about days or weeks from now?
I mean, I think this is a household discussion that I have with my children all of the time. And one in particularly, she's on the fence about voting altogether because she's like, you know.
She, your daughter?
Because she says, you know, I voted for Hillary Clinton. She won the popular vote, but then the electoral vote, the president won. And she's like, so what incentivizes me to go back and try this again? So I think a lot of what you've said today that she will hear, I think it would keep her motivated in the sense that, yeah, I have to go and do my due diligence and press that button on election day.
Well,
I appreciate
that. Let me add one more point as people of color. You know, there's a lot of talk about electability, and often when people say that, I think they're often talking about the, you know, and I've heard direct conversation. What are we going to do about the white voter that voted for? And they don't miss the power of, or the import in the last election of minority voters. So let's take a state like Wisconsin, for example. I did a big rally in Milwaukee with a lot of local black leaders to try to make the point that this state, I think there was 11,000 votes that Hillary Clinton lost by. You can correct me if it may have been 17,000, may have been 7, but it was somewhere around there. And in the city of Milwaukee alone, about 70,000 less African Americans voted. In that city alone than had voted before. If African American turnout was what it had been 4 years earlier, she would have won that state. The same thing, same data with just black voters in Michigan, same data in the state of Pennsylvania. My point is that King said this so well, that what we have to repent for in our day and age, he said, is not just the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so I worry that the most common way folks often give up their power is not thinking they have it in the first place. Like it's that seduction of cynicism that no matter what I do, it's always going to be the same. If people gave into that, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. I wouldn't be the 4th elected African American to the United States Senate and popularly elected in the history of our country. So much of what we are experiencing right now is a country that came by people who fought through cynicism, fought through despair. As Miss Jones, who lived in the projects around the corner, taught me that hope is the active conviction that despair will not have the last word. So my encouragement, knowing your kids are going to be listening to this, not for me, but for their mom and grandma, my encouragement to them is never, ever give up. As one of the hip hop legends of my generation would say, fight the power. Always fight the power. Keep fighting. That's how we're here, because power concedes nothing without a demand, as Frederick Douglass says. Without struggle, there will be no progress.
Diana, is there anything in the last hour that you've heard? Anything in this conversation that you've heard that you think, oh, that really struck a chord for me?
That I studied in Quito?
One of my icebreaker questions is going to be, how many years of Spanish did you really take? After I heard you speak, I'm like, I got to ask.
Estudié español en Quito y también en México también.
Wow, qué interesante. I should have done this interview in Spanish.
Yes, sí. Podemos. ¿Listo?
French, Hebrew, no.
But no, definitely recommend you hire millennials, Newark residents, shout out. You have a very robust policy agenda. I think it's going to take a lot of, creative minds and folks with lived experience.
Yeah.
So I definitely have to do a lot of my due diligence and, researching a lot of the policies that you mentioned. But yeah.
So I will say one thing, though, that as we found out in past elections, policies are really important and what people are going to do, but the policy differences between the 10 or so of us on that debate stage are small compared to the gulfs that exist between us and Donald Trump. And I can't even remember all the policy differences between Obama and Hillary in 2007 around this time, when Obama was polling 15, 20 points behind Hillary. But I know I was the first person in this region, me and the mayor of Jersey City, to break with Hillary. Had all the electeds in this region locked down, but we broke for Obama, not just because of policy, but also because of the spirit I felt our nation needed. And I really felt then that we needed somebody who can ignite and excite the electorate in a way that I knew Obama could, because we needed a wave election. And we won not only the presidency, but we won multiple audiences, we got the Senate back on 60 votes at that time, got the House of Representatives back. This is really an election that's not a referendum on the one guy in office, it's a referendum on all of us. And it's not just the head, but it's going to be the heart and the gut, and who can capture that spirit of our country to bring us back together to a sense of common cause and common purpose. It's what drives me in this election. It's not just because I think I've got better policy ideas. Heck, I've learned things from the broad field and a lot of the people who put things out, as I know I've affected the field with my policies. But at the end of the day, there is something going on when the issues that are really important, like a mother being able to afford childcare, like having good public schools to choose from, that things actually we agree on across partisan lines, like common sense gun safety. But something's breaking down in our society that we're getting to this point of tribalism, us versus them, where we can't get the big things done anymore. I think this has got to be an election that's about that as well, where we're going to beat Donald Trump. I feel like we have good candidates that can do that. But beating Donald Trump to me is the floor. It's not the ceiling. It gets us out of the valley. It doesn't get us to the mountaintop. I'm running because not just of policy ideas, but I think we need to get to the mountaintop again and be able to ignite that spirit, not partisan spirit, but that spirit that begins to prioritize the things that matter. Education, healthcare, taking care of our seniors, and more. We've got to get back, because in the global competition, when you see other people lowering the cost of college education dramatically more than us, taking care of babies when they're born dramatically than us, building better infrastructure. That's one thing that didn't come up, but in this region, that's a headache. The busiest rail corridor in America from Boston to DC, which runs right through our state, runs half an hour slower than it did in the 1960s. Meanwhile, China's built 18,000 miles of high-speed rail. These aren't partisan issues. These are, can we create the energy and the unity, the common cause to get those things done in our country? That's what we need from our leaders. That's why I'm running for president, and I hope that I can convince you guys over the next, it's a June primary in New Jersey. We're a late primary.
I'm sure it's the New Jersey primary that's going to decide it. Definitely.
Bizrat Hashem. Do you know what I just said? God willing, I said, in Hebrew. We're going to do a multilingual. Listen, your child is going to get a world education.
That's right.
We've now given them Spanish, Hebrew, English, and some rap lyrics from the 1980s.
I want to thank our two voters, Diana Condalejo and Chanel Duns. It's been great talking with you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I don't get a
And
thanks
also,
here.
of
Come
course,
on, right?
the candidate.
You used to be more polite to me now.
Senator
Now that I'm running for president, you're bullying me all the time.
Senator Cory Booker, thank you so much for taking the time.
It's great to see you here in Newark, man. Keep coming. It looks good on you, Newark.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.